Welcome to the Franchise Frontier, the podcast where we explore the evolving franchise landscape, dive into latest industry trends, and share actionable tools and tactics to help you build and grow your business.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Franchise Frontier podcast, where we explore business ownership and the realities behind entrepreneurship, lessons from people who actually been building the business every day. Today, we're joined by Michael Glassman. Michael has been navigating the world of business ownership firsthand and owns iFOAM of Southeast Denver. Today, we're going to unpack the journey a little bit, the wins, the challenges, some misconceptions, and lessons from the future that everybody needs to hear. So, Michael, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I like to start off a little bit and just kind of understand your journey. You know, what kind of inspired you to become a business owner?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think about this a lot. So I'll give you some context. I grew up in Denver, went to school in Boulder, and did a 5-year master's of accountancy plus a finance degree. And my father's a doctor, and they were very much pushed in us to get a professional type degree. So my siblings are lawyers. I was a CPA, but I realized, well, and let me back up a little bit. So going into my 5th year of school, I had a job offer from Arthur Andersen, and I was excited. I was a high performing guy. And at the time, Arthur Andersen was a blue chip firm. And then during that 5th year, Arthur Andersen essentially went bankrupt because of the Enron scandal. And, my job got absorbed by another company, but, I just kind of thought, all right, it's just life. These things happen. So I spent about a year working for a Big Four accountant firm in Denver. And I realized I've got to be closer to the business side of things. I'm not a bean counter. I want to get in front of things. So I moved to New York City and got a job at Lehman Brothers. And I was there when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and thankfully I left with some other folks, and we went to another asset manager. But I bring that up because essentially I looked at these two companies, right? Arthur Andersen, Lehman Brothers, both were considered safe. I sort of had this safe route, right? Like go work for these companies for 30 years, and both went bankrupt. And so in my head, I thought, all right, business ownership is risky. But I think in the world we live in now, so is being an employee. And I wasn't passionate about the work, and it was still risky. And so at about age of 32, I moved to San Francisco and started a software company. And we ran that business for 10 years and sold it to a private equity group in August of 2023. So about 3 years ago. But I had been very, very interested in the trades. And I knew when we sold the business, I'm just not the sort of person to not do anything. So I was already kind of thinking about like, what's the next step? And I started to get very interested in the trades and, plumbing, HVAC, electric. And I thought there was a real opportunity to roll them up. And I can get more into that later, kind of what my future plans are. But insulation was really the first business that I did that with. And so we launched in September of 23, and we've done pretty well so far. We've tripled revenue every year, and I think we're really starting to kind of hit our stride now.
And so, do you find that when you started to get into the trades, right, and you were looking at those things, was there something about insulation in general that kind of caught your eye?
So this was probably the wrong way to approach this, but essentially what happened is when my wife and I moved back to Denver from San Francisco, we bought this house that, was probably built in the 50s. And I'm traveling, I'm still working at the software company. So I'm on an airplane every week. And she calls me upset and says there's a bunch of mice scurrying in the bush in front of the house. I'm like, well, all right, let's call the exterminator. And guy comes over and he's like, you have no insulation in the attic, and the mice are getting in. And we're like, okay, well, who do we call to get this thing insulated? And he's like, I don't know. So I start doing research, I think we had 4 people come over and give quotes. Well, 4 people come over, 2 just dropped off the face of the earth. Um, and I kind of looked at it. We finally got a guy to do it. Cost 15 grand, and my energy bill was cut essentially in half the following month. And so I looked at this and said, "This is a high ticket item. It's got real value. It really changed my home, and the competition I view is relatively weak. And so I think there's an opportunity to develop something here." And when I sort of met the horsepower founders, and just kind of grew pretty quickly from there.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool. I mean, that's not a great story, but it's a cool story about you never want to be out of town when all of a sudden, that phone
Yeah,
call coming from your wife is never a good one.
yeah.
So when you look back and you talk about those 2 companies that were supposedly safe, right? And
Mhm.
and they both went bankrupt. Was there a moment where you knew like, "Listen, I just have to bet on myself here."
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to think exactly when that moment uh, occurred. I do think like there's nothing that special about me. I really think that if I had got a job with Arthur Anderson and that it still existed, and who knows, I might still be there today. It just sort of these couple of things just sort of forced me. I sort of noticed it when it first happened. I move out to New York, happens again, and I at the time felt like there's still a lot more I need to learn in a corporate setting. And I was an analyst covering technology and media companies, so I learned a ton. And then I think just gradually over time, just looking at the landscape, I said, I'm not passionate about this work, not in the way that I would be if I owned the outcome of it. And all these other things, as I mentioned, aren't really that safe. And so it just sort of like kind of progressed into finally saying, let's start a software company. And when I did that, I was still working. We weren't making any money, so I still had a job, and we started to achieve like incremental levels of success to the point where I finally was able to just do that full time, and then I've been doing it ever since.
And so I mean, I think I know the answer to this question, but my question was gonna be, do you find ownership throughout this time exciting, terrifying, or somewhere right in between?
I think it's both. The risk is real, right? Like I've got essentially everything tied up into this, and it can't fail. So that's terrifying, but also I think part of why what I really love about entrepreneurship and anybody that's an entrepreneur. I mean that goes from Jeff Bezos all the way to somebody that's a hot dog vendor and has their own route that they go. I think being able to do this and being confronted with the things that make you uncomfortable and fearful are actually really good for your personal growth. And so, although it's hard to navigate that and it's hard to be in a situation that's stressful and uncertain, I'm a huge believer that it's like really good for you to go through those experiences.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective, and I would imagine that most people don't think about that perspective. So for you, I know you're in year 3 now or so, but when you go back, right, and you started an insulation company, kinda walk us through that first year, kinda how you kinda got a hold of it, how you grasped things, and maybe biggest surprises or challenges.
Yeah, I think it was very stressful that first year. I think Horsepower's gotten a much better idea of what this business is and the target market. But at the time, I think we all sort of thought we were going to be doing a lot of residential retrofits. So existing homeowners who call you up just like I did and need insulation. I realized within a few weeks of launching that, like, with the overhead that we had, and the amount of money to have to put into digital ads to try to drum up that business, I made the decision to say we've got to pursue new construction, and that's new residential and commercial. And so there was this, kind of 6 week period where I'm like, this, we got to pivot pretty quick from what I thought was going to be our business model. And I can get more into that in more detail if you'd like, but I think I made the right decision on the new construction side. It's created some working capital issues because we've got to pay for material and employees, and then I might not get paid by these builders for 60 to 90 days. So it's created its own challenges, but ultimately, I do think we're on the right path.
Yeah, I think that, you're right. I think in any bit of new construction, right? Even if it's the dirt work, right? There's always that amount of time in between where there's some of that working capital that is
Exactly.
needed. But it's also good that you had the vision, right? After having the vision of the fact that there's not very many people that do insulation, you quickly realizing, okay, wait a minute, there's also probably not a lot of people like yourself who are hanging out inside their attic going, you know what, I think I need more insulation or
Right.
new
Right.
insulation or something to that extent. Where moving forward, as you're doing that in terms of new construction, right? Especially in Colorado, you're talking about there's an environmental issue to that. There's the benefits of having great insulation in a climate like you are. So I think that's a great pivot that you noticed and had some success doing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to my feeling that entrepreneurship is really good because it pushes you to solve uncomfortable things. And so I say that like, I was kind of taught when I was younger, like you got a plan B, always have a plan B. And I actually think that's terrible advice. To me, like there's no plan B. This has to work. And that makes it stressful at times, but I think you have to approach any business that way when you're first starting out. And you've got to take a very honest look at what's working and what's not and be able to change pretty quickly and be honest with yourself. Um, and I think that all stems from the fact that like you go into this being like this, I just won't let this fail. So I've got to do whatever I can to make it successful.
So beyond that pivot, talk about what were some other big challenges, right? In terms of, with insulation, obviously there is techs and those type of things, but talk about some other big challenges in that first year outside of obviously that initial pivot.
Yeah, I think it's it's probably a little naive of me to think like, hey, we're gonna start this business, we're gonna get some initial press, we'll get out in the market, and jobs are just gonna start flowing in. And it realized, and you're kind of on a race against time with depending on your cash flow, but you got to be able to, we had to get out and establish a relationship in the market. And so I was very, very involved really with everything on day one, but very much involved with nurturing our existing customers, asking them for referrals. Um, but it took us, and obviously we're still growing. So it's like, it's still taking time to develop the relationship. But I think that sort of race against the clock to get out in the market, establish the relationships, and then get deals done and paid, trying to do that before the cash runs out was the challenge. And I think no matter what business you're in, that's that first year you're going to face a lot of that.
Do you think if you had to put a pause right now and go back to that time, right? Let's just say, for example, you knew that you were going to go new construction. You knew
Yep.
that. Is there anything that you would, if you had to do it again in that before you open stage, that you would have done to maybe procure some of those relationships?
Yeah, I think so. When I started evaluating this, I would talk to folks that I knew that were in the construction space or real estate development and ask them questions. But about uh, how to develop this and things like that. But I think if I had to do it over again, I mean, I would have been marketing us before I even started. I'd be talking to everybody I know, saying, give us a shot. Um, and so I wish I had kind of started that sooner. And then I think the other thing, I had an investor of our software business tell me once that every business takes longer and needs more money than you think it will. And I think had I really understood the cash flow implications or the working capital, on a very kind of simple answer is I wish I came with a little bit more cash to the table to not have this gun to our head on day one saying you got to figure this out or you're going to run out of money.
Yeah. I can see how that, like you said, though, there's a little bit of both in that. There's a little bit of more cash equals a plan B, but maybe not, right? The gun to your head does help a little bit
Exactly.
too. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's great. Like, as you go through that, doing a software company and then this, was there any, going through that struggle, how did you mentally push through that and just say, this is what we have to get done?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I should say that I think you have to be a little nuts to start a business. And the reason that you do is there's a million reasons to say no. You could look at it and say the market's too crowded. Are we not, maybe we're not even solving a real pain point that is in the market. But you have to look at all those things, and you have essentially the one reason to say yes, and you do it. And so I think what I've sort of taught myself is I've made the decision to do this. I have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And really what that means is like you're going to face a ton of challenges. There's going to be things that you're not even thinking about that come up, and you need to, I think, really just have this feeling of like I none of that matters. We have a goal and we're going to achieve our goal, and you just have to kind of power through it. And not to say that that's easy. I mean, it's taken a toll on my personal life, my health. Um, but there's, sort of something in me that just says like we have to find a way to be successful.
Yeah. I think that, definitely hats off to you for having that mental fortitude in terms of that. I'm going to use a word here that's not the correct word, but as you look at now, describe a typical day. And the word I'm talking about is typical because we know in construction there are no typical days. But
Yeah.
just describe a day in the life of owning an iPhone.
Yeah. I mean, I think to answer that, let me say my day used to look like, and this was for the first few years of the business, is, I was the CFO, the salesperson, the project manager. Those days were chaotic in the sense that, we have guys out doing jobs. I'd be stopping by to do quality control on the work, make sure we were doing with the scope, what we're supposed to. And I'm coming from a background of software and finance. And so it was a very steep learning curve for me to make sure that um, I could act in that capacity. And then I'd have to, come back. Let's say I would go in the morning and do that. I'd come back. And then at that point say, all right, I got to start cold calling, or I've got to hit up some people in my network and try to find new deals. Um, what we've done since then is I brought on some really, really good salespeople, some really, really good project managers that I think in both. I kind of look back and I'm like, I did a mediocre job in a lot of things, and now we're getting to the point where what I want to do is do an excellent job. And I think Jeff Bezos talks about this a lot, where like your goal is to just make a few high quality decisions every day and get yourself to that point where you're thinking about strategy, what's next. And so my day to day is, obviously very different than it was. But the day to day now is really around checking in with the team, making sure, th- that they're bringing up any challenges that they're facing, try to solve those challenges with them. I'm still very involved on kind of the cash flow planning of the business, just given how um, I'd say uncertain our cash collections can be at any given time. Somebody could pay us quickly, somebody could pay us 6 weeks from now. And so trying to manage all of my expenses, payroll, all of those things, that's the one thing I haven't given up. I think we're getting close to where I'll need a controller. Um, but it's really kind of ensuring that the lights stay on, that our cash flow is going to support the expenses. And then really this next phase is I'm spending a lot of time evaluating the next business to sort of acquire into the portfolio. And my belief is I think the team's done a really good job of building relationships with our builders. We work, I'll call it round number, 100 builders. One builder has churned. Um, in the time that I've been here, and I'm still very upset about that. But we screwed up on that, and we lost the relationship. But the 99 others all come back for more work. So I feel really confident in the value that we're providing to the market. And so now my next phase is, okay, could we go acquire another trade? And now when I'm talking to a homeowner, I'm not just quoting insulation, but I've got a separate entity, a separate company that's doing HVAC or roofing or whatever it might be. And so
Right.
right now is really trying to figure out, okay, what do the next 5 years look like? And what businesses can we go acquire and then sort of drop into the network that we have?
Yeah, that's really cool that you have the ability to kind of look down the road a little bit. It's funny. I would imagine that people that happen to listen to the podcast every once in a while, they would be surprised. There's a multitude of people, whether it be spray foam, roofing, doesn't even matter. When I ask certain questions, it's always interesting when I hear uh, the same answer. right? When I hear the same answer come back to me that, and you made a great point, that it was just like, hey, you can only literally make 3 valuable conscious decisions in the day, or 5, 5, whatever it might be. It's very interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then to this point, right? You brought this up a little bit, but was there a point in time when you realized you had to stop doing everything yourself?
Yeah, well, it's funny. They sort of my lead project manager, who's now the GM of the business, and my lead salesperson, essentially, we've got a very open relationship, and my goal is to have people surround myself with people that are much smarter than I am. And so I've got good people around me, and they came to me and said, like, "You're holding us back. You've got to let go of some of the control." And so that really started prompted me to start thinking about this, and it's challenging. I mean, it's your role as a founder or a CEO, whatever you want to say, it almost changes dramatically by the year. I have to be a very different person when we first started this than I have to be now. If I were still like this, I mean, we're scrappy, but if I was just like, I'm doing everything, running around, working 18-hour days, um, it, it wouldn't be good for the business today. And so I have to sort of evolve. Um, how I approach things, and I mean, that's been a real challenge. I still don't think I've done a great job at it, but I think the only way to kinda unlock the business is to give up s hire the right people, smart people, ethical people, people that share the vision, and then you need to be able to trust those people, and let go of some of the control.
And so how has that hiring slash team management went? Is it something that you've leaned into now that you've been in the insulation space, or, did you just go through and start just finding good people?
Yeah, so right, I think that the feeling is generally on any of the trades. The challenge isn't the supply of work. There's a lot of work. It's the challenge is really the folks that do the trade. Um, how do you attract and retain the best talent? Um, I've always been this big believer in, we pay people, I'd say, slightly above market, which is important, but I think what we really have kind of tapped into is creating a culture in which people have transparency about where their career is going, right? And that you can look at this and say, as this business grows, there's a path for me to, let's say I'm an installer today, but I'm good in front of the customers. I'm bilingual. All right, we want you as a project. We want you to grow into a project manager. And same on the sales side. If you're great in residential, but maybe you want to own, and run a team of salespeople internally, or maybe you want to stay as an individual contributor and move to commercial where there's bigger, more complex deals. I think we really try, and nothing's perfect, but I think we really try to create an environment where people can see growth within the career, and I think that's helped us with retention quite a bit. And then what I've done on the sales side is I'm a I maybe could have come in and tried to poach a salesperson from another insulation company. But I'm sort of this believer. I came from tech and finance. I want my salespeople who maybe don't have the domain experience. They're not as knowledgeable in the space, but they're hungry to sell and learn. We can teach them the business, but they oftentimes can approach sales from a very different way than, let's say, somebody that's been in this industry for 20 years. Um, it's almost the exact opposite is true on the project manager side, where we really are, GM now, but formerly lead PM was a project manager for one of our customers. And he wanted to try something new. And I knew from working with him that he was excellent, smart, and ethical. And so I think what we've tried to do is like on our sales side of the shop, take folks from outside industries that can maybe apply some of that selling knowledge from those industries and apply it to the space. And on the project manager side and the install team side, trying to focus on folks that do really have that domain expertise.
Yeah. I think that, as you look through those kind of things, oftentimes it's finding what works for you and for what works for your business, right? And
Yep.
how you're trying to grow it. So
Yep.
That's great. As we flip a little bit here and you talk, like we said, if you're sitting at an airport and somebody walked up to you and said, "Hey, what do you do?" and you told them, "I own, iPhone insulation," you know, what's a piece of advice you would give someone considering business ownership?
Uh, it's funny. I'm going to paraphrase this. So don't quote me exactly, but Jensen Wang, who's the founder of NVIDIA, um, he's I think up there, maybe his top five wealthiest people in the world. They've got, I think, $1 trillion market cap. Anyways, he was speaking at I think a college campus a few months ago, and somebody asked him that same question: "What would you tell somebody who wants to get into this?" And his response is, "Don't do it. It's awful." And this is a billionaire that's been a huge success, and he's not shy about saying like it's tough. This is really tough. You can't hide. I've worked at big enough companies where there's always somebody that's employee that everybody knows doesn't do anything, but he or she's good at sort of hiding and kind of existing within that space. I mean, there's no hiding in entrepreneurship. Every one of your flaws and weaknesses will be exposed. And again, that's what one of the reasons I love it so much is it just helps you. It helps you grow. But I think you really have to come in and I think everybody, and I'm guilty of this as well, right? Like you go into starting a business and you're envisioning yourself 10 years from now when everything's kind of worked out and you're working 20 hours a week and cashing checks but the reality of it is like there is a lot of pain and suffering to get to that point. Sometimes it's that pain is shorter than others, but I think anybody probably if I re-listen to this it would almost sound like I'm encouraging people not to do this. I'm not saying that at all. I think it's so important. I'm so passionate about it, but it's hard. And I think you have to have that mindset when you go into it. And also the mindset of like, here's what I'm setting out to achieve. And like, wh- I, we're just going to go do it. And no matter what comes up, you have to keep marching forward.
Yeah, I also think that your point there at the end where having a long-term vision of where you're trying to get is probably just as important as where you're trying to get today.
Yep. Yep.
And so do you think that there's, if you as you've been through in a couple different industries, like do you think there's any sort of like personality traits that matter when being a good business owner?
That's a great question. I mean, I, the short answer is like, if you look around people that have been successful in entrepreneurship, I mean, you see a wide range of sort of personalities. I've seen some, um, introverts be successful, some extroverts, some people that don't have high morals um, and standards are successful. Some people that treat their employees terrible are successful. I think so. There's a bunch of different personalities or traits where people are successful, but I think what everyone has in common is, and again, this might sound simple to say, but this just like, I'm not quitting. I'm not, um, I've refused to let this fail. I think you have to have that mentality, even if it's a little crazy, right? And you might be in situations where you're like, this certainly happened to me, where I'm like, how am I going to get out of this? Like, I don't really see any options here, and you just got to keep kind of moving forward. So I think every entrepreneur or business owner has to have that mentality.
And so as you've ran a few businesses, is there one thing that you believed before business ownership that you no longer believe now?
It's also a great question. I think to just harp on the my previous comment that it's really difficult. I don't think I ever fully understood that. And in fact, I sort of tell this story like the building the business, like it, every woman that's giving birth, I would think if they had a distinct memory of labor, they'd only have one child and never do it again. And having a business like is kind of the same. It's like this painful, terrible experience, but then in the end, you get something that's really, really cool. Um, you almost selectively forget about the tough times, and I've been guilty of that. Like there's been things that I don't remember about how difficult it was to start the software company, and I'm like, I just think it's it's you just gotta it. I think I realized over time, like, it's just hard. It's really hard, and I didn't have a full appreciation of that before I started.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and you have to have a mentality where you gotta turn the page and keep reading the book, right? That's
Exactly.
definitely one thing.
Yeah.
Is there something is there like a mistake that you made that's made you a better operator now than maybe previously?
Yeah, I mean, shoot, I've made a ton of mistakes. I think the change now, in my younger years, especially at the software company, I felt like in many ways just a bull in a china shop. Like, come in, I didn't care who I pissed off. It was just trying to drive everybody towards the same goal. And I think in many ways it's important. You need to have that, but I think in many ways it rubbed people the wrong way, and it made me less effective as an owner and as a manager. And so as I've gotten older, I've really tried to learn from that and really try to understand, like leading is not just cramming down my ideology onto everybody else. It's understanding the motivations and thought processes of the people you work with, and then tap into those while you're all marching towards the same goal. Um, so there's nuance to it in a way that I don't think ever appreciated.
Yeah, that's really good insight. You touched a little bit on, the long-term goal for you in terms of what's next, in terms, understanding, um, where you want to grow. I want before we get back into that, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to insulation, even spray foam, any kind of insulation, from your seat right now, where do you kind of see the industry going?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think it's going to be somewhat market specific, particularly on new construction, because we've got to abide by ever changing building codes. Sorry. Um, what I do suspect is, really the insulation requirements have been increased, I think, in every market, but particular colder climates like Colorado. They've really increased the R value requirements in insulation, and they've done it so much so that um, oftentimes you can't fit the required R value in a 2x6 stud. So, where in the past, I think insulation was a very commoditized business. It was whoever could throw up fiberglass bat cheaper and faster than somebody else won. Now that the world and the market is changing to really focus on energy conservation, sustainability, that sort of thing, it's really pushing more spray foam into the market than I think had previously been put in. And that's great for us. I mean, it feels like we're right at this time where the market's going to be working in our favor. Now, obviously, that can change. We can have another 2008, type event that shuts down new builds for a long time. But outside of maybe some of those larger things, I think generally the market is focusing more on high quality solutions and less of a commodity. And whether that's more spray foam, more value engineering, meaning like we'd work with the roofers or the HVAC system to kind of create like a holistic package for new construction. I think those things are just going to continue to grow.
And so I would imagine that you leading into that is exactly why you're thinking about, what is the next add-on. So that way you're providing that holistic view, whether it be, like you said, HVAC, roof, whatever it is,
Yeah.
that way it's coming from one location and one voice.
Exactly. What we found with our customers is like I never want to have a business where I'm the lowest priced uh, provider. I just think that's a race to the bottom. Our goal is to provide enough value and articulate it in a way that people are willing to pay a little bit more. Now, it's not outrageous, but um, we don't want to be the lowest cost provider. And so, what we've really kind of thought about and prioritized is, if you work with a home builder, I mean, that's a tough job. They're busy. They've got to manage 15 different trades, the building inspector, all these other folks. If you can be the expert and come in and say, we're the one trade you don't have to worry about. You call us, we show up, the job's done right. People are willing to pay a little bit more for that because it's saving them time. And so we really prioritize um, generating that type of value for our customers and not being a commodity.
Yeah, go instead of being a commodity, you become a convenience, right? You're a
Exactly.
convenience. They know, hey, we call Mike, and this, and this is done when we need it done, and it's done the right way. Yeah. I think excuse me. I think moving forward, I think you're looking at it the right way. Whatever that next add-on part of the business will be interesting to see how you double back on that because like you said, you mentioned earlier, if you listen back, it would almost sound as if you're telling people not to buy a business. Meanwhile, you're thinking of what's the
Think
next
about
business I'm
buying.
gonna buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
My goal is five businesses in the next 5 years.
that's good. Well,
Yeah.
I hope to be a part of that. As we look into some things about yourself, right? I always ask these questions at the very end. I call them the 3 and out questions. What's your favorite way to unwind?
um, I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't have a lot of time to unwind these days. We discussed 3 little kids. So, um, it it's it's challenging because I've gotta, switch from business owner to dad mode when I get home.
Yep.
And so I have to be very thoughtful and conscious about how I do that. But spending time with my kid has given me kind of enormous satisfaction, and it helps. While it's stressful and kind of chaotic, it helps calm my sort of business brain down. And so I found a lot of fulfillment and joy in that. Um, Outside of that, I'm a big believer. It's really important to exercise, do something at least every day, and that really helps. I don't want to say calm my brain down, but my brain tends to move pretty quickly from one problem to the next, and I'm tired. And so it's like I'm trying to now really prioritize on how do I, for moments in time during the day, how do I bring that pace down? Because I think I'm going to be more efficient and effective if I can do that.
Yeah, totally understand. Is there
Uh,
is there one business tool that you can't live without?
I mean, at at this point, and this is why maybe CRMs are great business models because they're sticky. We have so much knowledge, sort of, our entire deal history sitting in our CRM that if that went away or we had to, just sales guys got a list on a notepad of who he's called, who he hasn't, I think we'd be in real trouble. And I think that'll continue to be more and more important as we grow. And so that's like, I think everything else I might be able to get by. I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking about it, but if our CRM went dark, we'd be in trouble.
And finally, is there in one word the most rewarding part about business ownership?
Yeah, I think that idea of being able to overcome challenges or things that make you uncomfortable and saying like, I put a bunch of work in. I try to make more decisions than I make wrong decisions. And with a little bit of luck and hard work, the business works out and is successful. I think to me, I get the same feeling that, let's say, like a marathon runner has when they cross the finish line, which is like, that was awful, but it was also amazing. And I'm going to do it again. That a sense of accomplishment or essentially being able to overcome challenges, I think is what keeps me going.
Having a very high level of resilience.
Yes.
Yes, well, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, if you're listening and thinking about business ownership, understand it takes work, growth, commitment, but the upside is real. To
Yep.
our listeners, thanks for joining us on the Franchise Frontier podcast. The playbook is out there. The question is, are you really ready to run it? Like and subscribe. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Michael, appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. It was good talking to you.